what we should be doing now, and this is where it becomes a little bit more controversial and where people do disagree with me. How can we show and demonstrate this, what Ethan Mollick calls the cybernetic teammate, I call the cybernetic classmate? We talk about a lot about healthy human relationships. Well, maybe we should start to talk about healthy cyber relationships, cyborg, if you like, relationships. How do we create healthy relationships with AI so that actually it becomes a synergistic thing? Because obviously, if our first principle is we're now in the situation where we partner with this growing entity, that's going to have a big impact on everything else.
Welcome to a really exciting episode of the World Education Show. Delighted to be joined here by Darren Coxon. And Darren, I've known for quite a few years, it must be said. And then suddenly he was the UK's AI guru, which was fantastic in schools. I'll point out in schools. And then since then, you've gone on to form the company, which is how I came past you again. Compass, where we're really looking at AI and very much focusing on the practical applications of AI for schools and for leadership teams.
That's very well summarized. And yeah, it's been a lot, probably more than 20 years now, I think, since we've known one another. It's been a long time.
It is. Has anything changed in education in that time?
No, not really.
AI. We've got AI, great. So we hear about large language models. We hear about generative AI. Could you just give us your take on what you're seeing as the phases and where we're at roughly with schools on each of those phases?
Yeah, I would still say that we're still kind of experimenting. Mainly, I would say it's mainly shadow AI. So, by that, I mean individual teachers using large language models. And again, large language models, generative AI, pretty much the same thing. So it's mainly still shadow. It's mainly teachers slightly guiltily using it in the background, maybe, not necessarily telling everybody they're using it. And then in terms of pupil use, we know how pupils are using these tools. We know that a lot of them are using them to offload the thinking and offload the writing. Not every pupil, and I think there's always a slight danger to say your pupils cheat with AI. Well, I would say that that's not actually always the case. I think there are decent enough evidence for lots of pupils who don't want to use them and really almost really actively dislike them. For me, it still feels like it's a bit of a mess. It still feels like schools are slightly burying their head in the sand, and I think they're not doing it in a kind of deliberate way. It's not like they're deliberately avoiding confronting AI. They just don't have time. They're firefighting, they're dealing with the day-to-day, and actually the thought of being strategic around something they don't really understand is where do you start? It's like you don't know what you don't know. Right now, if I look at the majority of schools that I'm working with, they're usually coming into the thinking, well, I've used ChatGPT a few times, didn't get very good response, or I've used Microsoft Copilot, it's really not working out very well for me. But we're really worried because we know that the pupils are way ahead of us. So yeah, it's a little bit grey, it's a little bit incoherent. And it has to change pretty soon because these models are really getting very, very good.
And very fast as well in terms of the way they're developing and our patience to sit on them. It's funny, I was just talking to my daughter on the way to school and I said, we were talking AI today, and she said, so I said to her, how are teachers using it? And she said, there's three types of teachers. There's some that are experimenting and happy to let us experiment and encouraging it. There are some that are very nervous and trying to use it in a structured form. And it's, I know you talked about a wrapper there, but I think their wrapper became PowerPoint after AI. And so it was quite a dull one. And she said, and there's some that are just so nervous they won't go near it and they dismiss it almost. And it's the fight or flight response, I guess, that's going in there.
Yeah, and I think she's articulated it quite perfectly, actually. And then I think from her perspective, she probably, like many pupils, is really quite anxious of not knowing how to use it, when to use it, being very nervous that she's going to be accused of using it when she hasn't. I mean, my daughter, so I have three kids. I've got a 19-year-old, 10-year-old, and 6-year-old. 19-year-old's just gone off to university. She's just down the road at York University, reading English literature, actually, which nothing to do with me. That was just her thing. No pressure put on from, but I'm obviously very pleased. Um, and she is very, I wouldn't say she's aggressively anti AI, but she's definitely, she doesn't use it, and she's very proud, almost proud of the fact that she doesn't need to use it, because she even used the phrase that it was probably a year ago now. She said, "I've got actually no room in my life for AI right now," which I always thought was a really nice way of articulating it. She says, "I've got my books, I've got my teachers. I really like my teachers. I've got a good brain. I can think about the stuff I'm doing. I'm enjoying the process of thinking. I mean, she says, I love writing. I don't want anyone to do it for me, or anything to do it for me." So I quite liked her, the notion of room and space. Like, no, there's no space. So why do I want to invite something in when there's no space for it right now? And my response was, fine, no problem, but make sure you do entertain the thought of bringing it in at some point in your future, because you may need it, because it may well be an employer expects you to use it. Because actually, if you don't, then you're going to, however brilliant you are in your brain, then there are things that AI can do that in the future that maybe you can't. So she's like, "Oh yeah, no," she says, "completely fine," and she didn't dismiss it in the future. But what she did say is, she's the thing I'm most nervous about right now is that my teacher reads something I've written, and they say that I used AI, and I would never use AI. And she said, "I wouldn't know what to do." And I said, "How would you feel about the teachers?" So she'd just say, "Well, trust would go out the window, because they don't believe me." So I think that's where a lot of kids are really nervous, that that they really feel very strongly against AI right now, and they worry that if their teacher does accuse them, that that would massively erode trust.
I watched what Hattie did with it, and basically he put, "Here's my 20 reference texts. You just take those into account. Now I want students to drive their own learning, and I want you to go through these phases, and you point out and then show how I could adapt each
Yeah,
period." It was ridiculously good, and it was. I mean, he would say very strongly, it's the questions you're asking it, and it's how much we understand the pedagogy that we're dealing with, whether we're just trying to present material or whether it's much more about the learning and how the
yeah.
student does and that adaptation that sits underneath it. But we'll get into ped tech a bit in a bit. I'm quite sure. Next one, feedback.
Yes and no. So formative, pretty good actually, and particularly if you give the tools to the pupils to enable them to get feedback on their own work. I think this is where it's really powerful. I'm always kind of, my argument is, why on earth would you take an essay in from a pupil, run it through an AI chatbot, get the feedback and give it back to them? Just give them the damn thing to do themselves. It's like it goes back to ownership, and I think pupils are much more likely to buy into AI as a feedback tool if you give them ownership of that feedback process. You use it as a tool to help you through the process, so actually it's going to inform your writing. Summative, less so. I think it's getting better, but I still don't think it's quite strong enough to be able to, unless you know what you're doing. And again, this comes because you can make them very accurate, but if you were just to kind of whack a load of essays through chat gpt and get it to kind of give you a mark out of 100 or whatever, then I think that's where they're still, I still wouldn't necessarily um recommend that. But so it's kind of half and half.
I suppose feedback's a hard one as well because I mean about a third of it has a negative impact, a third has no
Yeah,
impact, and a third's
yeah,
highly positive. And all teachers are giving it, so we're obviously there's a lot of stuff in there. But the main thing seems to be: did the student actually want to do something about it, and did they take an action on it, rather than the accuracy part of it, in order for it to be effective. So if it's only solving the accuracy part, it's not
yeah.
really moving the equation forward so much.
I also think that going back to kind of ownership, that if you whack these essays through ChatGPT and give the kids the responses back, the pupils are like, "You didn't even bother to read my essay." And I even had a pupil. This was one of my, absolutely true story. One of my daughter's friends said to her, you know, they were just chatting about it, and he said, "If the teacher sets the work with AI and marks the work with AI, why should I do the bit in the middle?" And it was kind of, and although my response would be, well, it kind of is your education, but okay, you can kind of see where he was coming from. that actually, if the teacher doesn't own either end, I don't have any feeling of ownership of what happens between the work being set and the work being assessed.
Cool. You mentioned grading very briefly there. Positive.
Yeah, I would say less so. I would probably recommend it less. I still actually think humans are better arbiters, particularly with subjects like English. Maybe less so with sort of more binary subjects like maths. But we had the whole A level debacle a few years back through COVID. And that was so. But that was mainly human. We just got it so badly wrong in terms of the instructions we gave AI that actually it became a very yeah, no, that became a very negative. We got a very negative impression of AI through that.
Tutoring.
Yeah, still not yet, not yet. I don't think we've got enough evidence to show that kids really care enough about having an AI tutor. Do they want to sit in front of a screen and be talked at by some machine? Not really. They want humans. I think in time, they will get much better. So I suppose the short answer to that is not yet.
Cool. I'm guessing something I find, I don't know, that maybe fits within this is if we take Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, we don't want work that's way inside that, obviously, which because it's too boring and often teachers can't do it. But it's very good at picking up on when you're on your zone of proximal development and
Yeah.
perhaps developing your schemata and doesn't push you too far beyond at that point where you're not capable of taking it in.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I always think there's a slight danger that we homogenize things too much, that actually sometimes it's quite good to be pushed outside a bit. And maybe sometimes it's quite good to be not outside of it, but be working with your peers who are within it or being pushed beyond, because then you can support them, support their development and support their learning. So I think, we know that it's very jagged, develops very jagged. So actually, if AI smooths that out, that I don't necessarily think long. I mean, maybe just in short bursts, but if all the kids are doing is just sitting inside the zone of proximal development all the time, that for me feels a bit too safe. And actually, I think sometimes they should be pushed well beyond them. Like, oh my goodness me, this is really, this is really going to make me work super hard because I just don't understand it. Or actually, this is quite easy for me, but I'm going to work with my friends who really struggle with it. I think that's where we need to make sure we don't smooth it out too much for too long.
Personalization, which and it has a horrendous effect size anyway. I think it's about 0.04, isn't it? So
Yeah, what does it even mean? I mean, if you learn properly, and I mean really embedded, not just like surface learning, it's because it is personal to you. You've kind of you've bought into whatever it is you're learning, and it means something to you, and therefore it is, and by its very definition personalized. But yeah, I mean, there isn't. Again, I think it just links back to what I've just said. That if we hyper personalize the education system and the education process, where we're all in our little bubble, our little zoned bubble, I just think that's not the real world. That's not how the world works. That you will not go into the world in your little bubble, in your little cocoon. You're going to be thrown things in the professional world where you think, I've got no idea what I'm doing. You're going to fake it till you make it. So that's where I think that there is clearly some advantages. I mean, obviously, I'm in the AI space. Can't be too down on it, but I just think that we've kind of got to the point where we're looking at adaptive learning, where it kind of works to a point. But I think if we want to embed a genuine love of learning, if we want to embed wonder and awe and compassion and all of those things, those are simply not by definition going to be hyper personalized, because actually they're interrelational. They're about how we relate to the world and all its messiness and all its inconsistencies. And if we just sit in our little personal bubble, we're not actually allowing the world in. And that's where I think we could be, although it might help you learn maths faster, will it actually help you to be a better human being? And I think the jury's profoundly out on that one.
nice one. And last one I'm going to do at the moment is ideation.
Really good. Yeah, big thumbs up with that. You see, and I think that's where it's strongest. So, and the reason it's strongest is, again, it depends on what type of a brain you've got. I have a very scattered brain. My brain fires in 15 different directions at once. It always has. I mean, it's just the nature of who I am, and how my brain works. What I find really good with AI is its ability to kind of take all of these scattered ideas and just kind of present them back to me in a way I'm like, yes. The number of times I literally was just doing it this morning. I'm just building some tools, building some AI sort of tools, and just couldn't get my head around what I wanted. I couldn't articulate it back to myself. So I just kind of literally, I speak when I'm using AI. I often speak. So rather than typing, I'll often speak. And I just gave it this big kind of stream of consciousness, like vomit, and it just like, oh, I can see what da 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 da, and it just so clearly synthesized and articulated my randomness that actually I latched onto one thing. It came back to me. I'm like, that's it, and that's where we need to drill down. And so, from an ideation perspective, I think it's extraordinary, and I think that's probably the area that is potentially most useful for students as well.
What would you say is the major risk of it all, first of all?
Well, it depends. I mean, there are categories of risk. There's a significant risk for cognitive offloading, obviously, because we're seeing it. You know, if we're not careful, that pupils will just continue to play the charade, and teachers will play a charade, and all of a sudden, AI is setting the work, doing the work, and assessing the work, and AI is getting better, but we aren't. There are arguments to say that we've actually moved away from the Anthropocene era into what James Lovelock calls the Novacene era. And it does make you wonder about the evolution of the human species, because it has a profound impact on how we look at education. Because we're kind of at that. I feel we're at a very significant inflection point right now. I mean, really significant. I mean, and by right now, I literally mean as of right now. Because what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, and it is just the last 2 weeks, we've seen the state intervene into the growth, and the availability of frontier AI models. So, the US government 2 weeks ago pulled, or told Anthropic to pull their two frontier models, Mythos and Fable. And we've just had the US government again step in with OpenAI and say the same thing currently to their latest GPT 5.6 models. So for the first time, we've kind of basically had a government stepping in and saying, these models, we're not comfortable. We're not comfortable with how safe they are. We're not comfortable with how people might use them. And I think the reason we're at this such a big inflection point, and goes back to this sort of notion of this Novacene period that I believe we are entering now, is that it's no longer just about. I mean, it hasn't been for a long time. Let's face it. I mean, we've had. If you read Andy Clark on this, since we've had tools, we've extended our mind into the tools that we've used. But we're now at the point where we're extending our mind into a tool that has its own mind. So it's no longer an inert extension of our mind that waits passively until we interact with it. So I mean, if reading the kind of stuff that the writing that Andy Clark has done, that we've used a tool and it's kind of enabled us to do more, whether it be word processor, whether right the way through basic tools through to word processors and what have you, social media. All of these are things which have extended, but they kind of wait passively until humans interact with them. Whereas now what we have with AI is we have something which is kind of growing and learning itself and developing itself. What we should be doing now, and this is where it becomes a little bit more controversial and where people do disagree with me, the education system now needs to be, how can we successfully begin that partnership? How can we show and demonstrate this, what Ethan Mollick calls the cybernetic teammate, I call the cybernetic classmate? How can we actually create healthy partnerships where we create a healthy relationship? We talk about a lot about healthy human relationships. Well, maybe we should start to talk about healthy cyber relationships, cyborg, if you like, relationships. How do we create healthy relationships with AI so that actually it becomes a synergistic thing. And if we do that, what should they what how does that impact on the curriculum, the pedagogy, the timetable, the use of space, the role of the teacher? Because obviously, if our first principle is we're now in the situation where we partner with this growing entity, that's going to have a big impact on everything else.
Yeah, and that demands quite a shift. We seem to be in a bit of an era here now, but managing risks against managing experimentation. And that seems to be a bit of a trade-off. And I'm just wondering what your views are and what you're seeing with schools.
I think there are very straightforward ways of managing risk. For example, you go through a procurement process where you make sure you tick all the right boxes. Is this tool GDPR compliant? Is it ISO 20001 compliant? The kind of basic, what are actually table stakes now? I mean, there's no, you've got to have these things in place. And then along with that, the procurement is the policy. This is how you can and can't use it, in literally two sides of A4 type policies. This is what we allow you and this is what we don't allow. I think once you've got that, like a sandbox, then you can experiment. And I think the schools that are doing the most interesting stuff are the ones that actually have the strictest rules. Because the teachers are like, well, I know I can use, for example, I know I can use Google Notebook LM because it's inside of my school tenancy and everything I upload is going onto my Google Drive and it's GDPR compliant. And therefore I can just have at it because I know it's a tool that is completely safe.
So what I'm really interested in now, Darren, is what you're seeing maybe AI can't solve, or maybe AI is actually causing more issues for us than we want. So I'm looking particularly at 4 areas here, and you might have more that we go beyond that one. So the first one is in behavior, and next one would be motivation, and I know the two inextricably link. And then the third one's engagement, which again may come through from that. And the last one was the hands-on experiential element of life and the nature of learning that comes through that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's probably worth kind of decoupling some of the aspects because AI is a very broad term. It doesn't really mean anything. If we're talking about the algorithm which serves everyone, not just kids, but serves us kind of TikTok content, and can obviously disrupt, then that's, that is kind of the way that AI can be used quite in a very disruptive way for our cognitive development and what have you. But if we're actually talking about, and that obviously has an impact, can have an impact on behavior and so on and so forth through distraction and what have you. But actually, if you're talking about how AI could potentially be used as a tool to support project-based learning, experiential learning, a helpful tool within a broader change to our education system, then I think actually could have potentially positive effects. So I think it's what I don't think we can say AI is bad and AI causes bad behavior. It's like, well, no, it's much bigger than that, and we need to kind of make sure we understand that AI can actually obviously create some issues through its use in the sort of platforms which are distracting all of us, not just kids, but all of us are profoundly distracted. I had to delete TikTok because it was just destroying my brain. But based on tools which might actually support a different approach to education.
So we just got into the research, and I know Hattie said that we do have this kind of emperor's new clothes syndrome around technology, and a lot of it's come in. I didn't realize how fast it's all come in. I mean, if you look at the ancient development of technology, and I know we only take the big ones like spoken word, writing, the printing press, postage stamp, which allowed all the distance learning and things like that. You forget about all these ones that have come through, but they're like centuries apart. Suddenly we've gone, pocket calculator came in about 67, PCs were out by 77, World Wide Web by 89, smart boards less visible now, virtual reality, smartphones, which are hugely obviously influential, video conferencing, 94, tablets around about 2000, then open source came in at 02, which had a huge effect on the whole of the computing industry. Where does AI rank around these, would you say?
I would say it's it's potentially going to be the most profound of all of those technologies. So if you look at kind of late 70s, early 80s, when the calculator came in properly. If you look at kind of when it was started to come into schools, it was kind of late 70s, early 80s. Um, Obviously, there was an impact, and there were lots of people who were kind of up in arms about it. But it was an inert object that only acted on when we acted on it. You move forward into the kind of through the 90s. The PC, I think, again, less. I certainly think it was less of an impact. I mean, I grew up in the 1980s. I was at school in the 1980s, and very very little impact the computer had on us. And I would say the 90s, the internet was similar in that it didn't have such a profound impact. And I think it's only been really since the advent of kind of social media within in the 2000s and through Google and what have you, that it's really then started to accelerate. Interactive whiteboards, late 90s, early 2000s. That's kind of when the big, from us was 97, 98 when we first started really properly seeing smartboards coming in, like really with a vengeance, I suppose. I've always had firmly believed that it's just a shiny surface on the wall. It didn't change pedagogy. It's just, I always thought, being able to drag something from one side of a whiteboard, what does that change? So dislike them. Always have done, always will do. Never liked smart boards. I was one of the few people in the school at Cambridge that didn't have one. I stubbornly resisted, and everyone loved my classroom and wanted to use it because no one liked them. So that for me did nothing. VLEs, yeah, MOOCs, not really. Distance learning, if you kind of look at really profound impact on the actual process of learning stuff, then I don't think none of it has really had a huge impact. iPads 2010, so I led the first state sixth form in the UK in 2011 to go one-to-one with iPads, and the first year was successful-ish. Second year less successful. By year three, we thought this is not the magic bullet that we were hoping it would be. So, and I think there are a lot of reasons why the ecosystem wasn't there. It's much, I think, more successful now. I'm working with a school at the moment, and they are going iPad one-to-one. And actually, what is built around the Apple ecosystem now is so much better than it was 15 years ago that actually I think it will be successful, whereas then it just wasn't.
There's a few careers or things that seem to be breaking, which AI seems to be formulating strongly, which is then going to have an implication for the curriculum, I think. First one, biometrics.
I mean, but we know we're seeing in the EU that these AI that reads biometrics and decides based on biometric data is already outlawed. And I think we'll see some of that factor into the UK. I think there's real huge dangers in things, tools that can read facial expressions and tone of voice and hesitation when you're using a tool that can potentially make decisions on the personality or the attitude of the person. So I'm always very wary of any tool which professes to use biometric data. Maybe there's a place for it in future, possibly, but it's certainly not one that I would promote.
Okay. The smart lenses, smart glasses seems to have gone a little bit out, but when we're seeing it's being used extensively in China now in terms of training teachers through what the kids are seeing.
Yeah, huge red flags. Huge red flags. Anything which harvests the information, audio visual information on children. I think there are massive red flags. And I mean, we even know, that there are laws in this country to say there are certain aspects of using the audiovisual data which you simply can't use. You simply can't do this. So again, I'm very nervous of things like these smart glasses coming into schools. I think there are safeguarding disaster waiting to happen.
What key bits, if I'm a school leader sitting there now, I haven't really started adopting AI or I've been ignoring it, or I've started moving into the experimental phase. Can I ask you a few different ones? One suggestion was late adoption. Is that a good one, would you say? So therefore the low cost options you get?
Well, by late adoption, what do you mean?
As in the old technology adoption curve.
Yeah, I mean, I think every school's going to have all four. If you look at the way most schools are going, they're going to have your innovators, they're going to have your early adopters. You're going to have your majority, and you're going to have your laggards. I mean, that's just every organization's the same. I think the strategy is how you utilize those four groups. That's really important. So, for example, you want to start fairly early on, getting little working groups together to support small scale pilots of AI. So, we're going to use AI for lesson planning or assessment, or we're going to try this particular tool for pupils to use for this very narrow kind of use case, and we're going to determine whether it's useful or not. You don't just want your innovators and your early adopters in there. You need to have your slightly critical, you know, majority who are not necessarily saying I'm never going to use it, but they're basically saying I don't, you need to prove this is going to work. I'm not going to adopt this unless I can see that there's going to be, some genuine benefit. So in that respect, I think that, just look at across the whole spectrum of the school, because they all have a role to play.
Nice one. Data choices. What data works well on it with AI, and what data would you keep away from AI?
Yeah, I mean, if you use a tool that has no content, has no grounding in your context, and this is critical, and this is something a lot of people sort of don't realize or overlook. If it kind of knows your curriculum, your school's pedagogical approach, where you've got to, what they've done previously. It can do a really good job if you give it what it needs at the beginning. What we're actually interestingly starting to see here is that giving it a wiki to read is almost a more efficient way of it getting the information it needs than it having to trawl through a relational database. And this is really an emerging property that we're just starting to understand. Because it's a language model, it actually works better with language structured formats. What I'm building at the moment, I'm building a tool, a management information system for schools that writes a wiki. So as it's interacting, it has its data in the database. It's got its tables and it's got its attendance data and it's got its medical data and blah blah blah. It's got all of that, like this persistent long term. But what it's also doing is it's actually writing through every interaction, is writing into what is essentially a Wikipedia of the school, like an indexed Wikipedia of the school. So, and this is something that we're only just starting to see in the last sort of probably 6 to 12 months, mainly with agents like agentic AI coming through.
Well, it's so nice you say that, because with a lot of the visible work we've done with schools groups and stuff, you just notice them. They've got 6 ways or 8 ways of collecting the same, basically what's the same data, student achievement data, and then mapping it against some kind of notional thing. And to have this move into more descriptive things just seems so exciting, because number one, you can start to see progressions within the children, and their individuality starts to really shine
Exactly
through
right.
rather than. Yeah, so that sounds very exciting. What sort of right? So one of the questions here is, how do we get good questions? Because the thing that AI probably isn't so good at is formulating questions, and unfortunately, in some schools we haven't been so good at teaching the formulation of it. You mentioned Socratic methodologies there. I'm wondering how we train kids to get ready for the complexity and specificity of questions that will bring the most out of AI.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I actually think it's pretty good. I mean, one of the first things I teach when I work with teachers is, if you're not sure what to say to AI, if you genuinely don't know how to get the best out of it, ask it. You know, say something like, I want to do such and such. I want to plan a scheme of work on Macbeth. Don't even know where to start. Let's go step by step. And I'll say that, just take me step by step. So in that respect, I think that it's less about not being sure what the right questions are to ask AI to get the most response. It's just understanding that you're building a relationship, and that relationship can literally start at the point where you're going to AI almost with a beginner's mind and just saying, I have no idea where to start.
Assessment. What's it going to do to assessment?
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, look, if we start to see work-based degrees, apprenticeships become more and more popular, which I think they are starting to. And I think people are starting to cotton on to this, particularly with the fact that more and more young people are not wanting to leave university with £50,000 in debt and no real guarantee of a job. I think we're going to see more and more kids leave school not going on to university. And if that is the case, that may well impact on the A level or the IB, and then that would impact on the GCSE, and it would sort of trickle down, I always could say trickle down academics rather than economics. That we see that sort of trickle down effect.
I mean, there's a big suggestion we need to move more to oral assessment, like we do with doctorates, like we do with vivas.
Yeah, I don't agree with that, and there are a few reasons. Um, what if I'm non-verbal? If I have autistic spectrum disorder, um, it's going to be very hard for me to be able to articulate my thoughts and ideas. So I think we're almost we're significantly disadvantaging a fairly large cross section of the student population if we move to Vivas. It's really hard to administer. So where are you going to do these orals? Are you going to do the Vivas in front of the class? Well, is that fair? So I think it's almost easy to say, yeah, we'll just move to, having oral assessments. I actually don't think that's feasible. Not really. Not to scale. Maybe if the kid knows that, there will be literally a lottery, like Dylan Williams lolly sticks. Oh, it's your turn to have the Viva. Maybe that would be a possible thing where it almost becomes like a spot check. But in a way, what this is doing is indicating the fact that the assessment system itself has to change. That it's not just about we move from doing an essay to actually doing an essay and then having a Viva. It's actually much more about, well, we should start to be exploring how we assess process. How can we accurately reflect the thinking process that a pupil goes through all the way through from and how they effectively partner with AI through that thinking process. That for me feels like a more relevant way of assessing.
If teachers wanted to know where to go to find teacher communities, you've mentioned the usual. Is there any particular ones you like? Any forums or any things that you might get involved in? I know you yourself run conferences sometimes are available. Which ones are really exciting?
I do a lot of work with the National College. So if it's just upskilling, that's a good place just to go to kind of get some basic. There are several courses that I've recorded. But again, connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll see a bunch of other people like me who publish stuff pretty well every day, give away a lot of stuff for free. I think LinkedIn is a better place from a community perspective than X, Twitter. I just feel like it's a slightly more collegiate and safe. Can be a real bear pit, X.
And Darren, where's your work going at the moment? What are you getting excited about?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot less training now, and I'm doing a lot more building. Because again, I feel like I've got reached the point where if I'm going to make the most impact, it will be through building solutions. So I'm using AI a lot to build with. I use Claude and Codex, ChatGPT Codex. And really, I've spent the last 2 years really trying to understand how to leverage them to the max. How far can I take? And actually, it turns out quite far. So I'm working with a group various schools across the UK right now, SEN schools and mainstream schools, to build solutions for them. Again, still very early stage, still kind of minimum viable product prototype stage, but it's really exciting because I think we're at the stage now where domain experts can now use these technical tools, maybe not to take it all the way to production level, but at least get it to the point where people can use it and start to kind of work out what works and what doesn't before it's then handed off to development teams.
Awesome. And how can people get in contact with you? You mentioned LinkedIn, Darren Coxon.
Yeah, Darren/Coxon. Best place. I mean, I have a website. I don't use it much, to be honest with you. I find that LinkedIn is always the best place to connect with me.
Fantastic. Darren, is there anything you would like to say that we didn't cover in this? Because that was quite a huge
Yeah, it was quite wide-ranging.
unpicking of where we're at.
No, not really. I would just say, just don't be scared of it. It's not that. I mean, probably sounds a bit weird to say. It's not that good yet. It's not that powerful. It's not going to. I mean, I see these comments on social media. I told my AI this, and it said it was going to take over the world. And this sort of dystopian narrative. It's nonsense. AI will give you a dystopian narrative if you prompt it, because it's been trained on dystopian fiction. If you literally press that button, it will give you that response, because that's what it's been. It's like call and response. It's been trained to respond in that way. And I think people get very scared. So just play. I literally say, just literally open up ChatGPT and just say, I want to do such and such, and I've got no idea what to do. Help me, please help me, because I'm clueless, and just see where it takes you. Because I think if you do that now, you'll be in a good place. but don't ignore it. Don't ignore it, because it is here to stay.
Permission to experiment from Darren Coxon.
Yeah,
Darren, thank you
exactly.
so much for joining us on the World Education Show.
Huge pleasure.
Absolutely fantastic input, and really great to explore a bit of what you're working on as well, and the challenges schools are facing.
Thanks, Stephen.